All right, my friends. Well, hi, hello, and welcome to Ransomware is Inevitable. Plan ahead with organizational resilience strategies. Now, today's webinar is sponsored by Veeam and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Jess Steinbach. I'm with Actual Tech Media, and I'm so happy that I get to be your moderator for this very, very important, complex, and all-around fascinating conversation, because this is a really interesting place to start our chat today. It might be a little uncomfortable, that idea that an attack is inevitable, because we are planning our defenses. We're building, we're fortifying, we're strengthening, we're working on that impenetrable onion of defense, right? Or jawbreaker or candy, whatever metaphor you like. But at the end of the day, no plan is complete without also thinking about the other side of the attack, about how we recover, how we get back up again. I've said this before, but when I learned to ride a motorcycle, somebody told me you dress for the slide, not the ride. So I don't get on my bike planning to go down. Hopefully not, knock on all the wood, but I wear the gear to make sure that if I do go down, I can get back up again on the other side and walk away. And that's what we're going to dig into today. How we can all dress for the slide, not the ride. How we can prepare and plan ahead. So when that terrible day happens, again, knock on all the wood, we get back up again and we walk away. There are a lot of moving pieces to this conversation, lots of complexity, lots of human and lots of technical elements. And that's why we have some incredible expert guidance here with us today. We've got two experts with us from the Veeam team, which I love. I will bring them out in just a moment. But first, I want to zip through a few of the important housekeeping points and then get us on our way. So let's start with a little tour of your audience console. I want to draw your attention over to the question section. This is where we're going to start out today, because the best part of a webinar like this one is the chance to ask questions directly of the expert presenters that we have here with us. Now, our speakers are going to be interacting. They're going to be watching those questions. They're going to be adjusting their content on the fly. So the more questions you ask, the more detailed information that's pertinent to you that you will get. So keep those questions coming in. In fact, we're going to give it a little test run right now. We're going to see how alive, awake, alert, and enthusiastic you all are. Let's test it out. Give us a little hi, give us a hello, tell us how you're doing. I see Andrew, I see Rakesh, I've got Richard and Zhang and Morteza and Jorge. We got a whole awesome crew. Keep those questions coming in all the way through our day today. Right now, give us a hi and hello. Tell us how you're doing. We want to hear from you. Now, that questions window is also the best place to reach out to our team if you do have any technical issues. Knock on wood, I know. Hopefully that doesn't come up. But if the tech gremlins have got a hold of you today and a browser refresh is not working for you, that's step one, browser refresh. But if that doesn't work, shoot us a message in the questions window and the Actual Tech Media team will be there to help you out. Okay, so we started with the questions window. We're going to go one tab over and we're going to spend some time in the handouts section right next to that questions window. The handouts section is absolutely jam-packed with cool resources and takeaways that you are going to want to spend some time with when we finish this conversation. Don't leave yet. Don't go down the rabbit hole with all those cool resources yet, because we've got lots of cool conversation ahead of you. But open those tabs, hold on to them, because when we close out this webinar, you will want to go back and revisit them. So make sure you've got those resources open and ready. All right, now, as always, it is not just awesome content that we are giving away. We also have a $250 Amazon gift card as a prize drawing that we will be giving away at the end of our webinar. Now, you do need to be here in live attendance in order to win, and all winners must meet the Actual Tech Media prize terms and conditions. If you're not sure what those terms and conditions are, no problem. You can head back over to that handouts tab that we were just chatting about, click in, scroll down, and you will find the full T's and C's waiting for you there. Okay, now not only does asking a question today help inform our incredible speakers and bring your specific needs, wants, interests, bright ideas right to the forefront of the conversation, it also enters you to win a $50 Amazon gift card. Now, we will be giving this away to the best question asked, and we review all of the questions asked after we wrap up our webinar. So even if your question does not get asked live, don't worry, because you are still entered to win. So keep those questions coming in. You get a gold star from me and you are entered to win that $50 Amazon gift card. So stay tuned for that. Okay, that was a lot of information very quickly, and we are just getting started. We haven't even gotten into the good stuff yet, so let's get our incredible speakers on out here with us. I am so excited to introduce all of you to our incredible dynamic duo here with us from the Veeam team, and that is Brad Lynch, Enterprise Engineer Leader at Veeam, and Ray Heffer, America's Field CISO, also at Veeam. All right, Brad and Ray, thank you so much for joining us today. We are pretty pumped to jump into this conversation.
Thank you, awesome, Jess. That was yeah. Thanks for having us. Awesome intro. I love your analogy about the motorcycle. And ransomware probably would be avoidable if it was just one person we had to focus on. But unfortunately, there's a whole host of people and so many people that work for a company, and not everybody wears their helmet, and not everybody wears slide gear. And sadly, that's we'll get into that a little bit more. But that's why it's so hard to keep ransomware out of organizations. But Ray, go ahead.
I was just going to congratulate you, Brad. If you notice on this slide, your title has changed. So well done on the promotion.
Thank you, Ray. Appreciate it.
That is an important call out. Well done, and congrats, Brad. And yes, I agree. And I think that's an interesting point, Brad, that you bring up, that we're not just dealing with that individual, we are dealing with that whole team. And that's part of what brings so much complexity to this, and part of what I'm so excited to kind of unpack with you guys today. And I got to start with a question though, because I'm reading the title of our webinar, and ransomware is inevitable. And is that it? Is that what we think? Why is ransomware inevitable?
We could end this webinar here, but tell you what we'll do. There's a long answer to this, and I'm hoping by the end, everyone's going to understand why we had that as the title. I don't want to paint doom and gloom, but reality is, it is inevitable. It's going to happen.
Okay, I like it. I am a little scared, mostly intrigued. And very, very pumped to come along for the ride. So I'm going to leave this to you both. Take it away, team.
Okay, so I'd love to start, Brad, if it's okay with you, with our ransomware trends report, because don't just take our word for it. Everyone watching, we're going to share some horror stories and customer stories, but here's the real stats from our latest report. Brad, any comments on this?
Yeah, I mean, I find this... This survey data, to your point, we don't want to scare anybody, but it's hard to look at the survey data and not scare anybody, right? You see, this report was done with over 1,200 different type of anonymous companies. Don't know what backup software they use, don't know what storage they had, don't know what cyber security tools they have, but this is the type of data they reported on. And I find it fascinating that 89% of these organizations cite some sort of ransom payment and large impact. So I know you have a whole bunch that you want to go in on this, but it's just really concerning. And why don't you go ahead and double click on a couple things in here?
Yeah. So by the way, the ransomware trends report, that's one of the handouts. So everyone's going to take that away. But I think what I get really concerned about, and also frustrated, I'll be honest, is just look at the last one there. 33% of organizations paid the ransom, but still couldn't recover after paying. And just to share, the story of the past few years and paint a picture, you may have heard of Lockbit in the news and media. I still consider Lockbit the most prolific ransomware out there. The FBI charged Dmitry Khoroshev. I think it was the 6th Lockbit member to be arrested and charged. The UK National Crime Agency were involved in that. I think Australia as well. I might be wrong, so don't quote me on that part. But they're still continuing to operate. There was a breach at a financial institution which affected 7.6 million Americans by Lockbit. And then there's groups like Black Basta. Now, I'm originally from the UK, as you can tell from my accent. I live in the United States now, but back in my original hometown in the UK, literally less than a mile from where I used to live, there's a utility company that was hit, and 260,000 customer records were exposed. And this is where I get frustrated and the concern here. It's not just the ransomware. It's not just this inability to recover your data, whether that's paying the ransom or, we'll get into that later, but it's this double extortion. They're also making customer data as our data, Brad, your personal information, mine, everyone listening, making that public and then demanding another ransom for that. Qilin, Qilin. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but they targeted the National Health Service in the UK, and healthcare is a huge target. And I think the reason for these numbers that we're seeing here, and if you did drill into this ransomware trends report, is these groups are targeting backups. They know full well that if they want their ransomware to be successful, they need to remove the ability for you to recover from that backup. So yeah, we could talk for an hour just on the ransomware trends report, but I think that's enough for now.
Yeah, and I just add what I find so interesting about this. You mentioned exfiltration, and we'll get into this a little bit more, but Veeam acquired a company called Coveware a few months ago, and this is an incident response firm that literally their job is to, you get hit by an incident, you get together with your cyber insurance company, or you involve law enforcement. They're most likely going to point you to this company or, a similar type of company. It's almost like having a company has a lawyer on retainer. You have these incident response firms on retainer. But what's really interesting in talking with them is their actual real data of dealing with this, right? And pretty much it's the exact amount of times they see these attackers encrypt data is equal to the times they see them exfiltrate data and steal data, which is really concerning. And then you get into the whole part of, okay, well, if an attacker just stole data, how do you actually get that data back? How do you actually trust a bad actor to give you that data back? Just a funny, quick story there is they actually saw a case where data was stolen. Ultimately, the company they were working with decided to pay. They advised them that wasn't best. Pretty much it's best to assume that once data's stolen, it's not coming back. But they decided to pay. This attacker sent them a 2-hour video just showing them deleting data. It's literally just a 2-hour video of them deleting data. And about halfway through the video, the customer realized that it wasn't even their data. They sent them a video of somebody else's data. So The point of that story is, unfortunately, in the cases of exfiltration, it's kind of best just to assume that data is gone. You can't trust these bad actors to actually give you a copy back, and even if they do, or delete that copy, and even if they do, who's to say they didn't make another additional copy?
Interesting. So, just to touch on Jess's opening question here, this is inevitable, and we say internally at Veeam, Brad, I'm sure you say this every day. It's when, not if, and I still strongly believe that. In fact, move to this next slide. 75% suffered ransomware attacks in 2023. This was based off the trends report again. So, more organizations were hit quarterly than they believe they were not hit at all. You can see that the figures in the report goes into much more detail. Why do you think this is happening? And I've got my view, but Brad, why do you think this is happening just more and more? It seems like every single day now in the news we're hearing of another ransomware attack.
Yeah, I think it's a few things, Ray, right? I think there's kind of some good news, bad news with this. I think the good news of this is, I think traditionally, and we'll get to this in a little bit, traditionally attackers used to be much more sophisticated. The average dwell time used to be like 6 months, and now it's down to 2 or 3 weeks. So I think attackers used to spend much more time trying to have a sophisticated attack, which meant they were doing less attacks because they were trying to go for more quality over quantity. But now what you're seeing is these attackers, it's almost ransomware for payment. It's ransomware as a service. There's these brokers out there that are constantly just out there looking for vulnerabilities, doing scans of the internet to look for websites that have these vulnerabilities and companies that have these vulnerabilities, constantly doing phishing attacks, and then selling those for essentially the highest bid, selling them to multiple bidders, right? That's why you see sometimes companies get hit multiple times. It's not usually that they're getting hit by one ransomware group the same multiple times. They're getting hit by multiple ransomware groups multiple times. So I think it's a bit of these ransom as a service, these ransomware groups that are just going out looking to do splash and dashes, right? Looking to go out there and exfiltrate data as fast as they possibly can, rather than spending hours and days and weeks stealing data or encrypting data, I should say. And if they find access to a OneDrive account that has merger and acquisition data or something that's sensitive, and seeing if asking for payment and seeing ultimately if customers will pay. I mean, I think that's kind of my take on it, but I'd love to hear your perspective, Ray.
Oh, you used one of my favorite metrics. This is dwell time. I think this is key. So Mandiant, and pretty, what you're referring to there, Mandiant each year have their M-Trends report, and it's come down. The latest report, I think 2023, it came down from 21 days to 16 days, and now it's down to 10. I might be wrong there, but it's come down. So yeah, it's just a couple of weeks. But my analogy is this: if I have an intruder in my home and they're moving from room to room, looking through my journal, looking through my closets and all my personal items for 1 hour, that's scary. But for 2 weeks, that's just terrifying to me. But that's exactly what's happening in the environments. And to your point, where they're selling access, I think there's two things happening. We have sophisticated ransomware, Blackbuster, they use a ransomware as a service, same as Lockbit. These are often developed by Russian and even Russian states. The military intelligence have had a hand in developing this. There's a book called Sandworm, which is named after the Russian military intelligence threat called Sandworm. But the fact that they're selling access, I think, could contribute to some of this dwell time. They're going to be getting access to hundreds of environments, VMware systems, OneDrive, as you mentioned, and then putting that for sale on a forum. And then, they're going to get hit multiple times. And that's what's terrifying. It's not a case of, okay, lightning struck, it's not going to strike twice. If you're hit once, it could even happen again. So as well as things like double extortion, where they're exposing data, then you're going to get hit again. So again, it comes back to my frustrations. I think some very simple things, and we'll talk about that, can prevent this or even enable you to recover from this. And I just think that, we're doing our small part here. If this message from today's webinar could get out across the globe, that would be amazing. But we're doing our part.
Well, and I just add one thing to that, Ray. We both mentioned OneDrive. I think there's this misconception that once this data moves to the cloud, it's just secure, and you have nothing to worry about with the SaaS. And what's really interesting, I just learned about this tool. Anybody watching can Google this. It's called OneDrive_Enum. It's on GitHub. But literally, what these attackers can do is this tool, OneDrive Enum. It's a pen testing tool, but unfortunately, bad actors use it as well. And all of our SharePoint sites are public URLs. If I go to veeam.tenant.ray.heifer.com, whatever it is, that's a public facing URL. Now, if I go to that site, I don't get, I of course don't have access to all your documents and emails and things like that, but I know if it's a valid email or a valid URL, valid username, I should say. So this tool will just go ahead and run this script that has 5 million names with different nomenclatures. So like Ray_Heifer or Ray.Heifer or whatever, to try to find your email. And it'll return and put down in a log file of all the 403 and 401 return codes it got, which essentially means it's a valid URL. So now if I'm an attacker, I run this script of 5 million names, let's say 800 of them hit, now I know I have 800 valid usernames at a certain company. Well, now my job is to, let's go force my way into those and use things like MFA bombing, MFA fatigue, right? You and I and probably folks on this call know if we get a push notification that says, hey, somebody's trying to log into my SharePoint site and it's not me, we're probably going to think, hey, something really strange is going on here. But a lot of business users who aren't as educated, right, going back to Jess's motorcycle analogy, not everybody wears their helmet. Not everybody wears slide gear. And eventually somebody at 3 a.m, they got a crying baby and something's going on. They finally just hit approve. And they're now in a SharePoint site and a OneDrive, looking at OneDrive documents. So I've talked about this a lot with different customers, and this is pretty common right now. Fortunately, people have changed their MFA techniques. So rather than just an approve, you have to enter the number, 46, 93, whatever number you get. So that does help prevent a lot of those types of attacks. But it's just an example of, how easy it is for these bad actors to get in.
It's funny, when my alarm clock goes off, I have my phone, and the alarm goes off in the morning, I'm sleepy. I'm too sleepy to turn it off. But previously, an MFA just hitting OK was easier than turning my alarm off. But that's that. But the OneDrive enumeration tool you mentioned, that's not a one-off either. It's actually quite a pertinent point you bring up. Some of you may have heard of an API abuse that happened on Twilio Authy. Now, Authy is a multi-factor authentication app owned by Twilio. It wasn't breached, but there was an API endpoint where, very similar to what you're describing with OneDrive there, Brad, where the threat actors presented, I think, 33 million US-based phone numbers. They may have been international, to validate if there is an Authy account there or not. So ultimately what they've ended up with is a CSV file with 33 million phone numbers with Authy accounts, which is obviously used for multi-factor authentication across multiple services. Haven't seen any threats emerge from that, but it's still a significant breach of trust and data. So we're just seeing these type of attacks every single day. I'm going to skip to this slide. Brad, I'll let you talk to this. There's a lot of text here, but perhaps we could cover it.
I know it's a lot, but it paints a good picture. And you and I were just touching on it a little bit. And And right, I think what's really important to know, when we first created this slide, it was 6 months as the dwell time, and now we shortened it to 72 days. And to Ray's point, we should probably really shorten this more to 10 to 14 days now. I don't want to read through the whole thing. It really just goes through understanding the steps that go on during an attack. I will call out a few things, and a little bit Ray and I touched on, but I think what's really important to understand is these attackers and these brokers, right? We talk about ransomware as a service. They're constantly scanning the network. They're constantly sending phishing attacks, and they're constantly observing your environment. You're really best to take on this, and I know Ray's going to talk about this a little bit, but you're really best taking that zero trust framework and embracing it. It's best to assume that they are already in your network. And once you embrace that strategy, it helps really alleviate the ability to elevate access, move laterally, build a base of operations, things like that. But if you are not taking that assumption, you're probably doing yourself a pretty big disservice. Another thing I want to call it is sometimes they might not be asking for ransomware payments, right? I get a question a lot, what does a ransomware attack look like in the cloud? What if we're 100% cloud-based? And something we've seen quite often is, okay, they still get in really the same way, whether your infrastructure is in the cloud or on-prem. But oftentimes what they might do is they might try to quickly spin up instances, right? They might try to create EC2 instances in AWS or Azure VMs in Azure and do some quick crypto mining and try to be in and out, things like that, and build their base of operations that way. And then the last thing here is we kind of continue to move right, and we're going to talk more about this, but their goal is to make it impossible for you to recover. The situations that we see where customers are not able to recover, it's because ultimately they have not tested their backups and they do not have a backup that's usable, right? It's really critical to thoroughly have a backup that's been tested, that's immutable. What we often see, we have our incident response team being from Coveware, and a famous quote that they have is, you don't rise to the occasion of an incident response, you fall to your level of preparation. And I think that's a really powerful quote to keep in mind. If you haven't been testing your backups, if you haven't taken the time to make sure you have a copy that's offline or air-gapped or immutable, then it's safe to say these attackers, if they're going to get into your environment, then they're going to get into your backup server as well. So that piece is really, really crucial. And the cases where when we have a ransomware support SWAT team, any case that's come in that's tagged with ransomware goes to that ransomware support SWAT team. And I asked these guys, I said, hey, is there a situation when the customer's backing up to an immutable repository that they weren't able to recover data? And the answer is simply no. When these attackers are able to cripple your repository, it's because you don't have an immutable repository of some sort, whether that's on-prem or a second copy somewhere else.
So interesting. I just thought of another analogy. I love my analogies, Brad. So who remembers the movie War Games? This was in the 80s. I'm going to age myself now, but we've got a feature that reminds me of the movie. So at the beginning of the movie, there's two military officers in a nuclear launch facility. And in order to launch the nuclear missiles, they have to turn a key. Each of them have their own key that has to be turned at the same time. So kind of the same thing as Four Eyes administration, right? So going back to what you said, Brad, you've got to assume we have the threat. We have a threat inside the environment. And that could be any employee that's clicked on a weaponized PDF, click that link in an email. And that's so common. That's predominantly the cause of so many of these ransomware attacks. And then they move laterally. So now let's assume they've moved across the environment and they've assumed the identity of a backup admin. And you mentioned compromising cloud services for crypto. But the other thing I've seen, and I'm hoping this isn't on the rise, but seen more of, is now imagine they spin up a compromised S3 bucket and then try and do a backup create job and direct that to S3 to exfiltrate data, or just delete the backups altogether. Four Eyes administration, am I correct in thinking that's just going to prevent that altogether?
Yeah, no. I mean, when you combine Four Eyes with immutability, it's so powerful, right? Because now you're talking about a situation where, let's say an attacker gets in, they need a second level of administrator approvals, to your point, right? Two people turning the key at the same time. And then there's almost this other layer to the cake where, okay, fine, even if you turn the keys at the same time, the attacker would still be left with, sorry, access denied, this is an immutable repository. So it's just an additional layer that's so key. And this kind of goes into one last thing, and then I want to move on to another great slide that you have. But I see Daryl's question about is defense in depth still a great strategy, And it certainly is, right? The more layers of defense you have, right? And that goes into 4IS, that goes into mutability, that goes into all the XDR and EDR tools that you have. And then also your backup tools doing additional scanning, which of course Veeam has, and we'll get into that a little bit. But a quote that a CISO put to me a few months ago that I loved is, he said we probably spend 90% of our budget on prevention tools, 10% of our budget on recovery tools. And he wasn't saying that they need to flip that. That would be dramatic. But he was certainly trying to get the point across is we probably need to think about this a little bit differently. Maybe it's 70-30, 80-20. And essentially, there's that huge gap between the security team and the backup team. Because ultimately, once you agree that ransomware is inevitable and it's going to happen, okay, you spend all this money and time on prevention tools. But what money and time have you spent on actually recovering and doing tests and things like that? Because you're going to want to be ready and prepared.
Yeah, for sure. And defense in depth, still a big fan. Obviously that includes physical security, network security, endpoint, APIs. I talked about the Twilio. That was an API endpoint. We're seeing more of that. So, and one of the we're going to move on to this, but Zero Trust, I think, does a great job of covering all of these areas as well, because you've got to assume you've got a breach, and that lateral movement could be also physically, not just in the digital domain. Do you want to move on? Should we move on to the next slide, Brad?
Yeah, let's do it. I would be curious your thoughts on this question from Richard, though, real quick, Ray. He asked about Honeypots and their success. I think what my quick opinion on, and then I'd love to hear from you, is the thing with Honeypots is it can be, for it to work effectively, it's a pretty heavy investment, right? Because you're really going to want to have an effective honeypot. 10 to 15% of your infrastructure probably has to be set up as a honeypot. Otherwise, if you just have, if you're 1,000 VM environment, let's say 1,000 machine environment, and you just have these 2 or 3 servers set aside as a honeypot, it's most likely not going to be that effective, right? The likelihood of them getting those 2 or 3 versus getting the rest of your environment is pretty low. So now you're talking about really increasing your whole infrastructure budget by 10 to 15% to focus on honeypots. And plus these take time, right? If you don't take the time to actually keep these honeypots up and running and make them look real, then the attacker is quickly going to know that this is just, some dummy server that this company put out there. But I'd be curious your thoughts there, Ray.
No, you're right. And the malware is even becoming sophisticated, where they're detecting the fact they're in sandboxed environments. They're detecting that. So honeypots, it's interesting. This was the late 90s. I actually set up a server. I worked at an internet service provider, and we just gave it a clean internet connection. It took 3 minutes before it was running an FTP server and a bunch of pirated software was on there, put it that way. But it was actually quite fun to watch. That was an extreme version of a honeypot. But I do question now, with the sophistication of the threats we're seeing, how effective they are, compared to back in the old days. It's port scanning, and you have a honeypot server and it can find a supposedly weak server, and you can detect that. I still think there's a place, but I wouldn't put too much percentage of the budget into that. So I love this slide. So let me share some stats. I'm actually waiting for the latest version of this. So this is from IBM. IBM each year do the cost of a data breach report, and you can see in 2023 it took organizations 204 days to identify a breach. And this is different to dwell time. This is specific to data breaches. And that has come down. It was 277 days 277 days in 2022. But if you look at the green and the purple, there's 2 metrics. And these are metrics I often discuss when working with CISOs. And that's the mean time to identify and the mean time to contain a threat. And it's that mean time to contain a threat that does concern me, that, it's gone up. It's taking 73 days on average to contain that threat. Now, this obviously isn't just specific to ransomware. This is around data breaches. And on data breaches, again, in the news, you may have heard of Ticketmaster. You probably couldn't escape that one. 560 million customer records, names, addresses, phone numbers were for sale. I'm not sure if it sold, but it was selling on breach forums for $500,000. But another concerning area was Santander Bank, who I used to bank with back in the UK. They're a global organization, 30 million customer records, and I believe 6 million account numbers and balances in there, along with credit card numbers. Now, that breach was selling for $2 million, and the threat actor said Santander, you're welcome to purchase this. This is a one-time purchase. I don't know if they did or not. I hadn't kept up with that. But this is predominantly because of info stealers. So ransomware does this too. It's exfiltrating the data, but there's also this focus on just stealing the information. So this is probably what this slide talks about. But waiting for the 2024 report. I'm not sure when this is released, but this is eye-opening. Brad, I don't know if you've got any comments here.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing. I'm going to jump ahead and then we'll jump back just to kind of highlight something. But what I find really interesting about this incident response firm that we acquired being Coveware, so Coveware by Veeam, is just to build off that, is sometimes these data breaches or the fact that they then expose the customer data or employee data, whatever it might be, it's because the company decided not to pay a ransom. So what's really interesting about this is this data aggregation that Coveware does. They have the sophisticated data to show you, okay, what's the overall likelihood of this specific attack group, right? So they have essentially data specific to each attack group, right? Lockbit, Black Cat, Basta, the list goes on and on. So they can say, okay, you were hit by Black Cat. We can tell you the likelihood. If you don't pay, they're likely to DDoS attack the heck out of your websites, or they're likely to then harass your employees or harass your customers, or what's the likelihood that they've actually seen this ransomware group go out and sell your data out on the dark market, things like of that nature. So I think it's just interesting when you look at it to get an idea of, okay, we've been hit by an attacker, but what's the likelihood of, like, for example, in this case with Black Cat, 97% of the time, Black Cat claims that they exfiltrated your data, they stole your data, when really it's actually 82% of the time. So that's still very high, right? But some of the time, it's clear that they're actually just bluffing. So anyways, I just wanted to jump ahead of that slide real quick, because sometimes these data breaches, when they actually expose your data, it's a result of the company deciding not to pay a ransom. And then that was the attacker's response was, okay, well, then we're just going to go ahead and share all the data that we took from you, which is a catch-22, because you might pay and they might still share the data, right? So it's an interesting situation to be in. I'm just going to jump back to your slide here, though, Ray.
No, that's good. And also on Coveware, they work with law enforcement, the FBI, and it may be, and in fact, the FBI have decryption keys for some of the ransomware variants out there. So, it may be that through Coveware, they have, is it UniDecode? That's correct, isn't it, Brad? The UniDecode utility to reverse and decrypt the data without having to pay a ransom. So not all is lost. And, the bluff, they're saying we've got the data. We hear that so many times.
Well, you hit on a point that I love, and that what's a really big misconception is, okay, hey, maybe law enforcement, or maybe our incident response firm, or maybe the attacker gives us a decryption key. That's great. Well, guess what? These attackers spend a lot more time on their encryption algorithms than they do their decryption algorithms, right? So they might be single threaded. They might not be very consistent. So for example, to mitigate the spread, you might turn off your machines, make sure we mitigate the spread across the network. Well, if you go and run these decryption keys, turn your machines on and go run a decryption key on your production network, you risk corrupting data. So where I'm going with all that is, even if you obtain the decryption keys from law enforcement, incident response firm, ultimately the attacker, you're still going to need your backups or some second copy to test the decryption key on, because you're not just going to willy-nilly go run this on your production environment and cross your fingers and hope for the best. So I think it's just really critical that oftentimes say, hey, we're just going to pay, we'll get the decryption key, and we're not going to need our backups. It doesn't matter. You're really, regardless whether you pay or don't pay, your backups still play a critical part in this recovery process.
Well, as part of that CIA triad, the CISO's rule book here, integrity. And I'll tell you what I would prefer. If I was given a choice of using Veeam to recover my business critical data, or some shell script that a threat actor's given me, I know which one I'm going to pick. It's going to be Veeam.
Absolutely. I'm just going to jump back to your slide here, Ray.
Yeah, no, this is great. So I just wanted to highlight some of the efforts globally around the focus of ransomware. So in May of 2021, before I get to this, actually, there was the executive order by the president. Zero trust architecture, which we will get to, I promise, was a key part of that. But also a focus on supply chain. One of the things the supply chain, as part of that executive order, require is for developers to provide an SBOM, or that's a software bill of materials. cybersecurity review board is part of that. But I think the fundamental or the foundation of the executive order is zero trust. Now, globally, we have new regulations, NIS2 in Europe, along with DORA, which is for financial institutions. There's privacy regulations such as GDPR. And, I couldn't put everything on this slide, otherwise you wouldn't see the map at all. But just to highlight a few of them, in the US, as far as privacy regulations go, we have CCPA, that's the California Consumer Privacy Act. It's not listed here, but we don't have a GDPR equivalent. But personally, I'd like to see us go that way. But NIST, CISA, they provide some excellent frameworks. And again, I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar why I get frustrated. If you were just to pick a framework, let's pick NIST, or let's pick CISA, zero trust, you can mitigate against these attacks, enabling MFA, the backups. And one of the things we've done in Veeam is extend on the zero trust model. In fact, is it okay to proceed? I'll go to the next slide.
Yeah.
One of the I love to share my obsession with fantasy fiction. This was based off my love for The Hobbit. I read that as a child. Lord of the Rings, Gandalf. They all go on this journey, and I say zero trust is a bit like a hero's journey. And the ransom in The Hobbit was the dragon hoarding the treasure for the dwarves. So now my nerdy bit's done. Where I'm going with this is, if you pick a framework like zero trust, and CISA do an excellent job of this, they present 5. In fact, I'll skip to the next slide. They present 5 pillars, and out of those 5 pillars, if you skip to the end, we have data. But even CISA say, okay, when it comes to recovery of that data, look at NIST, and they hand you off. So one of the things we've done also at Veeam is extend upon the zero trust framework into data resilience, which I'll show you here. Extending on these zero trust principles, if I build that slide out. So again, Brad, you mentioned this earlier on, we must assume a breach. And zero trust, the core theme is we must verify explicitly. And this isn't just verifying the user. In this example, it's access with identity and access management and multi-factor authentication. But going back to those pillars, we had the user, the application, the data, the device, the network. Every one of those 5 pillars we need to verify. So even APIs and communication between apps. We have containers, we have microservices. That landscape is becoming more complicated. But how we've extended this to data resilience is separating backup software and backup storage, resilient zones. And my favorite, and you mentioned this, is immutability. That combination of those is going to allow you to recover, again, when this happens. Brad, I'll let you talk to this as well.
Yeah, absolutely right. And my biased but favorite way Veeam approaches immutability, right, is the way we integrate with so many different storage vendors for immutability, right? We offer our own. So if you prefer just having your own, have your own hardened repository, we certainly can provide that to you. But also just the ability to leverage existing infrastructure within your environment. So many people have this push for the cloud or existing infrastructure that might be lying around. So our ability to integrate, with EMC, NetApp, Pure, Exagrid, Wasabi, AWS, Azure, GCP, right? We could probably spend the next 10 minutes of me trying to just rattle off as many as I can remember. But our integration ability to tie in with other object lock technologies to offer you both an immutable copy on-prem and a second copy, whether that's in the cloud or also in your DR environment, is so crucial. And we're trying to make this even easier, right? So we also announced earlier this year Veeam Vault. So essentially that gives you right built into our console. You could say, hey, I want a second copy that I know is immutable somewhere. And it'll integrate with Veeam Vault. It's built into the user interface. So you can say, hey, send this second copy out to Veeam Vault. And it'll be prepackaged, immutable, encrypted, soup to nuts, and you don't have to manage that infrastructure. So it's just really, I know we're hitting on it a lot, and this is a perfect segue into the next slide, if you don't mind, Ray. But when we talk about when we talk about that embrace the breach, and I'll keep talking, but I'll pause here for a second. Somebody's got to put in the chat what this screenshot is from, because we talk about being nerds. There's got to be somebody on the call who knows where the screenshot's from. But when we talk about embracing the breach, you have to assume if the attacker's already in, then the attacker's already going to get at your backup software, right? And once they're in, this screenshot just kind of highlights unfortunately, how easy it is for them to move laterally, or at least how easy it is to find what it is that they're looking for. And I'm not seeing anything in the chat, unfortunately, but this screenshot is nearly 30 years old at this point. I think it's like 25 years old. And this is from the Matrix. This is from the first Matrix where Trinity hacks into the database. And it's actually a very accurate depiction of what goes on. But, there's Angry IP and more modern tools now. But just using simple Nmap, you're able to scan your environment, see what IPs are available, are being used, see what services are being used on those IPs. So for the most part, all backup software uses the same ports, right? Whether it's ours or a competition, they're using similar ports to communicate with VMware, similar ports to communicate with different physical servers to back them up. So at the end of the day, they're using simple Nmaps commands. They can say, hey, go find the specific IPs that's using these specific services that have these ports open, and within, an hour is probably being generous. Ray, you talked about it. If somebody breaks into your house and just for an hour, if they're snooping around, what they'll find, it's not going to take them long to figure out what that backup software is and ultimately try to cripple it. And when we talk about immutability, it's so important to assume, hey, do a test. Assume that an attacker just logged into your backup server, whether you use Veeam or one of our competitors. What could they actually do? And if the answer is they have any type of ability to manipulate or delete or encrypt those backups, I hope your first action after this call is to change that. And with Veeam's immutability, whether it's our own hardened repo that we can provide you or one that we integrate with, helps prevent that. So essentially, and the attacker would get access denied. With our hardened repo, we don't store the credentials within Veeam. You could actually disable SSH. So now you're talking about a situation where the attacker's physically in your data center. And at that point, right, we probably have bigger fish to fry because they could start a fire or pull drives or do all sorts of things to cause havoc. But yeah, anything you want to add to that, Ray?
A statement and a question. So I'll start with this. So Black Basta, when I was looking into that ransomware variant, one of the things it does, or at least some of the variants of it does, is it's looking for a path /VMFS/volumes. And anyone that uses VMware will know that's where the VMDKs are stored on a VMware ESXi server. Now, going back, I mentioned Scattered Spider. I think I mentioned at the beginning, but just to remind everyone, Scattered Spider are a threat actor or group of threat actors that are predominantly English-speaking, native English-speaking in the UK, US, Canada. And this is why they've been ever so successful through social engineering and getting that initial access. Now, they famously carried out a ransomware attack on MGM Resorts. MGM had 100 VMware ESXi servers compromised, and it caused mayhem. It's not just the slot machines that went dark, but people couldn't check into their hotel rooms, car parking barriers wouldn't open, and it was a disaster. It was a very notable one. And that leads me to my question is, we've talked about their threat actors targeting backups. I haven't seen it directly yet, but I'm curious if you have, Brad. Have you seen any ransomware variants that will automatically look for Veeam, look for backup targets? Are we seeing that out there?
Yeah, I think like I kind of mentioned earlier, right? I think whether it's Veeam or whether it's any type of competitor backup software, we definitely see that. These attackers get in, and very quickly they're able to establish, what backup server you're using, what repositories you're using, things of that nature, and ultimately try to cripple them. When I mentioned it earlier, but when I talked to our ransomware support SWAT team, so any case that comes in that's tagged with ransomware goes to them. The only cases they see where our customers have a difficulty time recovery is if they did not have an immutable backup. Yeah. It's really, I hate to simplify it, but that's really what it comes down to. The cases where our customers had an immutable backup, whether that's their primary copy or secondary copy, they very much were able to have a successful time recovering. Now, how long that recovery took really depended on how often they test their backups, right? That's kind of the next piece of this. Okay, the first step, I would say it's really three steps. The first step is actually having a usable copy. The second step is being able to quickly identify a clean restore point, right? I talk all the time, ransomware is the worst kind of disaster, and that's such a blanket statement. So what does that mean, right? In a regular disaster prior to ransomware being so prevalent, it was almost easy. You hate to call DR easy, but at the end of the day, I was able to use my latest restore point and recover as quickly as possible directly into production. Those two things are completely untrue in a ransomware recovery. You don't know that your latest restore point is usable in a recovery, and you can't restore it directly into production. You have to restore it into this isolated clean room, whatever terminology you want to use, and do further scanning before you migrate into production. And that's what makes ransomware recovery so much different than disaster recovery. So I think it's just critical that once you have that immutable copy, now it comes into, okay, how often have we actually tested this? Have we built a clean room? Have we pre-built a clean room, or then we've tested the ability to recover X amount of servers and Y amount of time? And what does that look like? Do we actually know the dependencies that these have? Kind of going back to basic DR, what VMs depend on other VMs? What order do these need to be restored in? And then it kind of goes into a more traditional DR type of test. And then the ability to find a backup quickly goes into what we have. We don't have specific slides on this, but we have YARA rules. So anybody that doesn't know what YARA stands for, well, maybe I'll pause. I'll explain it and see if anybody can put in the chat what YARA stands for, because it's kind of funny. But what YARA rules allow you to do is, rather than using AV tools to scan your environment, which certainly are part of a ransomware recovery regardless, but if I do an AV scan on my laptop right now, which is, whatever it is, 200 or 300 gigs of used data, that's going to take 3 or 4 hours. So how am I supposed to do an AV scan effectively on 1,000 machines that are 500 gigs each? It's not possible. But what a YARA rule allows you to do is say, hey, the security team identified an incident. We know it looks like this, and YARA rules are able to quickly go in and go through your backups and scan them based on that specific rule until it finds a restore point that doesn't have that incident of compromise seen on the restore point. And then you're like, okay, 4 days ago, the YARA rule doesn't see it. Now I can use that as a restore point rather than doing a full restore. Okay, we see a compromise. Now I have to start that whole process over again. That's not scalable. I don't see it in the chat, but yeah, YARA stands for yet another recursive acronym, which I find kind of funny.
Yeah, and this goes back to dwell time as well, doesn't it, Brad? Because 2 weeks where before you even detect that the threat actors on the network, you don't want to reinfect the environment by recovering from the previous night's backup. You need to know when that infection occurred and go back to that actual clean backup. So I think YARA rules and integrating that with security teams, which, by the way, our ransomware trends report, I'm going to shout out to that again, but there's another very interesting finding is that we are just seeing that IT teams that are typically responsible for backup and security teams, there you go, you've got the stat up here, are not talking. And we need to bring that together, not just in terms of the teams talking, but incident response playbooks, tabletop exercises, and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm seeing a couple questions here real quick. I see Daryl. Would one of your techniques be to have a second offsite data backup off the system? Yeah, I mean, I couldn't stress this enough, how important it is to have a secondary copy offsite. Now, what I would say is, you say off the system, so I don't know if you're referring to like truly air gap. We've kind of changed the meaning of air gap. Air gap used to mean like completely not connected to the network, where really the only thing that actually does that is tape, which gets into the elephant in the room of, okay, yeah, you have a copy that you can recover from, but do you have a copy that you can recover from in a timely manner that meets the business needs? And if the answer is, well, it's coming off tape, that might not meet the CFOs and CEOs' expectations. So air gap terminology has kind of evolved into logical air gap, which really is having that second copy that truly is immutable, right? Truly is, if an attacker were to get in, they had no ability to delete it. They have no ability to edit it, no matter what. They can't call and make a support case. They can't get a second administrator approval. There's literally zero way to delete that data for X period of time you define in your environment. And that's more called logical air gap, which is absolutely a necessity. Because even if you have a primary copy that's quote unquote logical air gaps are immutable, well, if the attacker got into your primary environment, law enforcement might almost fence you off like a crime scene from you accessing that environment. So now, even though you have this immutable copy, you might not be given access to it from your incident response team or law enforcement. So you still need that second copy that you're able to access that's separate from potentially where the incident took place. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, Ray.
Just a comment you made earlier on about the cloud, and there's a feature called Object Lock. Yeah, I'm just thinking of Amazon S3, for example, but there's others. Could you talk to that a bit, Brad? Because I know that having that immutability, just moving to the cloud doesn't mean you're now insecure. We can actually leverage some technology such as Object Lock to provide that.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So even if that data, if you've kind of in that piece, I mean, part of that cloud journey where you actually have running instances in AWS, Azure, GCP, which I would say most of our customers do at this point, right? We leverage those internal object lock capabilities, right? So AWS S3 has object lock, Azure has blob level container immutability, GCP has their level of immutability. So you can still protect those workloads and get immutability within those those cloud native workloads, which is really important. And I see a couple other questions coming in. I might just ask this to you. I'd be curious your answer from Jorge's question here, Ray. Do you feel like banning cyber currency in general would be the simplest solution to solving ransomware?
Okay, so I wish it were that simple. I don't think. I think that's way past the point of no return on that. But honestly, let's say cryptocurrency didn't exist, maybe we would have got to ransomware that it just would look different. We're seeing that bank accounts are being hacked, people's identities are being stolen. So maybe it would just have a different shape to it. But yeah, I think right or wrong, cryptocurrency could be used for good, but it's also used by the bad actors out there. That's a difficult one. We could get into philosophy of that.
It is an interesting question, Jorge. I think, my 2 cents on it real quick is like, crypto now spans multiple governments, right? And there's no, I don't want to get into politics here, but right, there's no global government that can say, no more crypto. So it's almost all these governments have to together at the same time ban crypto, which would be very difficult, right? If just the US banned crypto, but you can do it in China and other countries, that's not really going to solve the greater problem. And crypto existed long before Coinbase and more other tools came out that made crypto more consumable. So there was still always this ability to transfer cryptocurrencies before it became more usable to the regular day-to-day user. So I don't know if just banning it, I don't know if it's as easy as that, unfortunately, but I get your point that if maybe globally it could be banned, what options then would the attackers have? Because, we're not just going to write them a check to their address. I see one other question that yeah, go ahead, Ray.
No, you just got to say another question there about identifying malware in the system. Can you feed that back into Yara to scan backups? I'll let you take that one.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So that's the power of integrating Yara into your backup tools that we've added. So essentially, we actually saw this example recently. It wasn't ransomware, but it was actually an attacker trying to do, or a bad actor, I should say, trying to do crypto mining within the environment. And essentially, the security team identified this suspicious behavior, and then they went to the backup team and said, "Hey, go deploy this Yara rule in your backups and find a restore point until you don't see this type of behavior going on." And the Yara rules allow for quick scanning because it's a very specific rule. You can create filters that say, "Hey, only look for files that are less than 1 meg that have this specific file extension," whatever it might be. So you can the more granular your rules are, the faster the scan can be. So the answer to your question, Alejandro, the answer is yes, right? You can take that Yara rule, put it into Veeam, and then quickly find the restore point until that incident and that specific rule doesn't exist, and then that gives you an idea of where to start your recovery from.
Yeah. Okay, there's another question there on the minimum number of backups you recommend. I think there was a slide where we briefly mentioned the 3-2-1 rule, but there's 3-2-1-1-0. I'm happy to take that unless you want to do that, Brad.
No, go for it, Ray.
And feel free to extend on this. So yeah, there's if you search Veeam and 3-2-1-1-0, we have this rule. So at least 3 copies of your data, and store these on 2 different types of media, 1 copy off-site, 1 copy offline or air-gapped, that's the immutable part, and then the 0. I think this is, you've said this, but we can reiterate this time and time again. It's so important. 0 errors. We must test and verify those backups and make sure we can recover without any errors in there. So that's the guidance. I don't know if you want to expand on that, Brad.
No, I mean, you hit the nail on the head, right? I mean, a lot of that is up to the organization, right? What's your RPOs and RTOs? What's the maximum data you feel like you can lose? What's the time you need to be able to recover in that you can have downtime in? So some of that's up to the organization, compliance, security, things like that. What I would say what's really nice about Veeam is you have multiple layers. So what's interesting is Gartner did this report that essentially the spirit of the report was, how can you actually effectively recover from ransomware? And what was really interesting about it is essentially the first bullet point was, if you're just going to recover from backups, best of luck to you, essentially saying it's not going to work. So what they talked about is having multiple layers of recovery. And what's really powerful about Veeam is we allow you to have different types of SLAs. So yeah, we can do backup. That's what most people know us as, but we can also do traditional replication, right? So being able to replicate your data from primary site A to secondary site B and get, second type of RPO. So replicating that data near synchronously, as well as integrate with your storage platform. So now you're talking about scenarios, okay, maybe we back up once a day, maybe we take hourly snapshots, and maybe we replicate every 30 seconds to 60 seconds. So now, based on the tier of data that you have, how you've inventoried your data, you can apply an SLA that meets the actual criticality and importance of that data, which is really important. And I'm just going to jump one slide here, and actually I'm going to jump a couple slides here, and with only 5 minutes left. But I do want to get to something that's interesting in that the incident response firm we acquired, Coverra by Veeam. What I find really interesting about this is ultimately, so in Q1 of 2024, so this past Q1, ultimately 28% of the incidents they were involved in, the company decided to pay the ransom. Now, we operate under the model of never pay the ransom, and we do everything we can and work with the company of not paying that ransom. But for various reasons, companies will decide, right? We saw it with United Healthcare, that they decided to pay the $22 million ransom. And sometimes in parallel, they might try to recover backups at the same time, but ultimately board members get involved, executives get involved. And if they feel like that's the best way to ensure that data that was stolen doesn't get shared out, that's the company's prerogative. We can't tell them, that's not allowed. That's their decision. But why I'm showing this slide is ultimately, if it gets to that point of negotiation and settlement in the 28% of cases, is what's really interesting about this is their expertise and ability to negotiate that payment down. So what you see here is maybe the attacker originally asked for 5 or 6 million. They ultimately negotiated it down to 1 or 2 million, right? A 40 to 60% difference. And they also have statistics to show you per ransomware group what their historical trends are and what they were able to get that ransomware payment down to, which I find very interesting. And the last thing here that's important to call it is that, it's not like, I don't know if anybody's ever used the tool Truebill, where they'll go out and look for all the services that you pay monthly fees for. So like Spotify, AT&T, whatever. And then if they saved you any money, they keep some of the difference as the profit. That's not what happens here. If they saved you, if the ransomware payment went down $1 million, they don't keep any of that. That's just pure settlement money, and they're not trying to keep any of that difference. So I just find that piece pretty interesting. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that, Ray.
I know we're almost at time, and I just want to reiterate the question at the beginning. Hopefully, through all of this, you're seeing ransomware is a when, not if. And we haven't even touched on the threats from AI and AI security. That could be another hour, but I'll leave it there.
That should be another hour. I think my key takeaway from this is we need more time with both of you. We need to dig into this a little bit more because you've covered so much, and I feel like we're just getting started. There's so much more to get into and explore. But you've definitely convinced me. I'm still feeling a little bit of nerves and a little bit excited. So that's where we are. But I want to wrap with kind of an invite, I guess, for everyone out there, because I think for a lot of the folks in the audience, we had some great questions. We got to as many as we could. I know we didn't hit all of them. So a reminder to everyone that asked a question, we are going to make sure that your questions get sent to Veeam. So you will get follow-ups. Please do keep those questions rolling in. But before we kind of wrap, if somebody out there was wanting to continue the conversation with Veeam, what would you suggest is the best way to get started?
Yeah, absolutely. I could take that one. So there's definitely some handouts in there that I would encourage everybody to go through. I'll take you to our website. We have all types of educational resources. We have a free university, things of that nature. And then there's always the option to engage us from the website. And, a friendly sales rep would probably reach out, but then eventually you'd get a meeting with your local engineer who would bypass all the sales speak.
Not a friendly sales engineer as well.
Friendly as well.
Friendly as well. I've met a lot of your team members. You've got some very friendly people. Before, and I do think that's a great kind of next step. And normally I'd wrap it up there, but you know what? I just can't let you guys go yet. So I have to ask, for kind of a final thought from each of you. If you had something that you wanted everyone in the audience to either walk away, maybe taking action on, or thinking about a little bit further. And maybe Brad, I'll ask you to kick us off, and then Ray, you can give us our final key grand finale thought.
Yeah, I'd say my biggest takeaway that I hope folks walk away with is, if you assume, you embrace that zero trust model, and you assume the attacker's already in your network, ask yourself, if they were to get into your backup environment, what damage could they do? And if the answer is they could do a lot, take action and put a plan in place to change that.
Yeah, just to follow from that, let's take Brad's advice. You assume a breach is going to happen, and if you're not doing it already, pick a framework, whether that's NIST cybersecurity framework or the CISA zero trust model. Pick something and run with that, and feel free to talk to us. We can actually help you along that journey as well.
I really like that. I do think sometimes when we hear these conversations, and especially starting with this sort of, it's inevitable, you can maybe want to run and hide. There can be a sense of wanting to ostrich a little bit and put our heads in the sand. And at the end of the day, we need to do something. So if you're not sure which framework to go with, just pick one and go. Like do your research, do the come to sessions like this, but at the end of the day, do something. And I think that's a great place to kind of wrap things up. I hate that we have to wrap this up. I wish we could keep going. And I'm sorry to see both of you go, but I hope that we will get to continue this conversation again soon. And my very heartfelt thank you to both of you for a really wonderful conversation today.
It's been a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess.
All right. Well, to all of you out there who had some great questions coming in, again, a reminder that those are going to get answers. So keep those questions rolling. If you have something that's still kind of burning a hole in your brain, make sure you get that out, because you will hear back from Veeam. I do also want to remind you all to visit the handouts tab. Make sure you've got all of those tabs open and saved. We've got some more info on the Veeam CyberSecure, really making sure that you've got those best practices for security, getting that expert assistance with secure design and implementation, ongoing health assessments. That's huge. We all know this is iterative. And of course, that world-class incident response. So make sure you spend some time reading through that. There's also some great reporting on the 2024 ransomware trends. I mean, this is huge, right? We all know this is top of mind, and we need to know what's evolving. Ransomware is not stationary, so neither can we be, right? So keep reading about those trends. Make sure you've got that 2024 ransomware trends report. And of course, there's an article, we talked about this a little bit, that Coveware. So there's a great article kind of exploring that acquisition of Coveware and what you can expect from that with Veeam. So take a little time to get those resources. Make sure you've read through those. And before you leave us, we do have, I'm going to sneak in, I know we're over time, but I do have a prize giveaway for all of you. Well, for one of you, sorry, not for all of you. Everyone's like, yay. We have a $250 Amazon gift card going to one of you lucky winners here with us, who is live and present at the webinar. And that special somebody today is Lilit Aurora from Wisconsin. Lilit Aurora from the great state of Wisconsin. So Lilit, congratulations. As always, we will be in touch about claiming your prize after we wrap. We will also be in touch with our best question giveaway. The competition was fierce today. Some great questions coming in. So we will follow up with that best question giveaway card after we wrap. All right. Well, with that, I hate to say it, but we are going to leave things there. And on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to once again thank Veeam for making this incredible webinar possible, especially to our wonderful speakers here with us today, Ray and Brad, for guiding us through such an interesting conversation. I love when we get a little bit off book. We kind of go inside the mind of an expert and what they're excited about and what they're interested in, and really getting to explore what we all need to know, and getting into some questions from all of you. I see you, Thomas. Thank you. On back to you. And again, thanks to everyone who asked some wonderful questions today. I always say this, but I genuinely mean it. My biggest high fives, my biggest thank yous go to all of you out there with us for taking the time out of your day to join in this conversation. I know that it is not comfortable to think about the fact that ransomware is inevitable. It is not comfortable to think about the fact that it is when, not if. But today, we started with this conversation around dressing for the slide, not the ride. Today, I think we all took big steps towards putting those helmets on, putting on that leather gear. We are all looking very cool and strong as we head out on our rides together. And I hope that that's the takeaway that you're walking away from, is if you don't already feel like you've got all the protective gear on, the steps that maybe you're going to start thinking about, some steps, some action steps and follow-ups to the conversation today, because this is just the jumping off point, right? So keep going, keep making things happen, and keep learning and asking those questions. Well, with that, we'll leave it there. I hope that I'll get to see all of you at a webinar again soon. And until then, I hope you all have an absolutely wonderful end to your day. Thanks all.